Welcome to another episode of Commuting Q&A. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I've honestly been traveling quite a bit, driving home from LA today. So tweeted out back in the end of July, asked me anything related to portfolios, learning and growing, and craft. This is really kind of targeted at people that are trying to come up in the design industry and me trying to share anything that I have learned or things that I think that work. I've done quite a bit of interviewing when I was at Design Inc., a lot of portfolio reviews, been on a lot of different types of teams, like one-only teams where it's just me, smaller startup teams, and obviously large corporate teams like Netflix and Google. So excited to dig into this. I've got a lot of comments about me doing this more safely and not holding my phone and reading while driving. So I've got my Pixel over here on a hands-free magnet mount thing, and all my cameras, my GoPro and my A7 mounted, and my mic recording device mounted. So I think this should be a good setup, even though it's a little overkill. All right, first question is from Brian. He says, I'm an illustrator. Are case studies still useful when showcasing work to someone? I guess it depends on who that someone is. If you're trying to get a job at a larger organization or a company that has some sort of design team, I think case studies, even if it's like a smaller role, either way, I think illustration sometimes is seen as like this small little role where you just like draw and fill a picture for an area. And I think we're at the place in design now, and with products, with acquisition, with branding, where illustration plays a much bigger role than just some nice pretty images and error states and whatnot. If you're not familiar, which most of you probably are, Meg Robichaud, she does a lot of great work in writing over at Shopify, and on her Medium, I'll link it below, she's done a lot of talking about visual design systems as it relates to illustration. I'm actually working on a project right now at Google trying to develop illustration style and design system for a project I'm working on, and it's pretty in-depth when you get down to the scalability and the perspective of an illustrative design system. So a case study that can show that kind of systematic thinking from the perspective of an illustrator, I definitely think case studies are super valuable. The second note about case studies is I think when you can see a nice thought out case study, it elevates the seniority of the designer or the creative. It really shows that you know how to think about hard problems. You think about the product from like beginning to end. You think about scalability, and it's not just like I can make nice images or designs or screens or mocks. 100%, Brian. I think case studies are still super useful. All right, second question. My buddy Nick, if you could create a totally unique design project for a group of students, what would it be? So I was thinking about this quite a bit. I think a design project to redesign money would be super fascinating. One, because a lot of like currency design is somewhat ugly or overly complicated, but I think that's also part of the domain itself. I think money needs to be complicated in design so that it can't be easily reproduced. Obviously for counterfeit, I think there's inherently a good amount of constraints with designing currency, like a dollar bill. Equally, there's a ton of freedom and creativity as far as visual language, texture, layering, not only like graphically, but physically, like the materials. So I think designing a new $100 bill or something would be an awesome design project for print, design, digital. This could have like a whole digital currency like stint to it. But that's honestly something that I think would be fun to design, and challenging enough for a designer to like get them out of their comfort zone as a student, but also put constraints on them so it's like realistic and not like up in the sky kind of project. All right, so this is a kind of a hard question from Philip. He says, I think it's as related to Android, how do you push great experiences in a platform that is full of constraint that don't allow for great experiences unless redone? If you have enough constraint that you can't create good experiences, then you can't create a good experience, I guess. there's certain points where a project or a system is just not going to turn out well if you have so much constraint that you can't have influence. It's kind of a vague question, so I'm not sure exactly how to answer it. That being said, like working on Android Auto a couple years ago, there was a ton of constraint that were, some things were legal, like from the government, of things we couldn't do in the car. Some of the things were just based on screen size and actual requirements for being able to touch things while you were driving. Those constraints made it very, very, very difficult to create nice experiences that were beautiful and easy to use. That being said, it was honestly just through a ton of iteration and exploration, and that's not easily done. Those things can take years, depending on how complex the constraints are. So I don't think there's any magic answer for this. I think the hard part is deciding when to stop trying. I think there comes a point where it's like, this just isn't going to work, or we need to reevaluate our goals or the platform, or whatever is dictating those constraints. I don't know if that answers your question, Philip, but good luck. All right, so Nicholas says, it's hard to get an interview for a UX or product design internship. Seems like it's because I've never shipped anything big. What should I do? This is a good question. I don't think you have to ship something big to get an internship. I had a design internship for print design early on. I think the hard thing is that you don't have to necessarily have shipped something big or a huge portfolio, but you definitely have to have something that shows your ambition and your grittiness to just get stuff done and build stuff. It doesn't have to be big, but it should be you should have definitely some thought out case studies. You maybe should reach out to an engineer that's kind of in the same state where you're at, that wants to work on something and hack on something. There's a lot you can do and build that shows you know what you're doing, or that you're thinking that moving in the direction of someone that they would want as an intern, and have some hard skills that they can build on, and that you can provide enough value to them in exchange for them providing value to you. Getting the interview and those things, I think, is hard. Like I still have never interviewed straight through like a regular channel, and that seems like a place of privilege. Like, I just have lots of friends in industries to get interviews. I don't really think it's that. I think you honestly just need to be active on Dribbble, be active on Twitter, be active on Behance, go to meetups, go to conferences, and like hack your way in. The more people you meet, the easier it is to have those opportunities, be it an internship or a job at a startup. Honestly, I think a job at a startup as a designer, and just kind of like failing through it and learning as you go, is way better than an internship. It's hard. It was my path into tech. I just joined a startup, had never designed a mobile app before, and just figured it out, downloaded a bunch of resources, and made a lot of bad decisions until my decisions started becoming better. But yeah, I don't think there's any excuse not to have an app that you built, or a case study or a redesign that you did. I think those things all show a ton of tenacity and ambition for a designer, and it doesn't have to be your school portfolio. Like, if you just come out with a school portfolio, you're like base zero. Like, everyone has a school portfolio, and they're usually pretty bad or generic. So anything beyond that, especially if it's something that you did on your own or with a friend, says a lot. All right. This question is from Yoel. How many case studies or work should be in a portfolio nowadays? When I was creating my portfolio, when I was leaving designing and going back to Google, I had to figure out this same thing. As a general rule, I would say that depth is better than breadth. Having more detail and context, as I mentioned earlier, like in a case study, for me as a person that interviews a lot of people, is way more valuable than a lot of projects. I don't think the number really matters. I think you should just think very carefully of how you rank your projects in your portfolio, what ones you put first, and being very picky that you only put in work that you're very proud of. There's been often times that I've seen portfolios that had some good work, but also some really bad work. And that can be like a red flag of like, why did they put this in their portfolio? Why did they think this was good enough for me to look at? Are they really proud of this? Do they think this represents their best work? More importantly for me than the number of work is the quality of the work that you have in there. You definitely should have, I think at a minimum, 3 maybe 5. I think my portfolio has 5 case studies. And they're pretty in-depth. They're all like 1 to 2 year projects. If you're designing like a marketing page or a landing page, that's I wouldn't even really call that a project. That's pretty small. But it depends on the role. If you did a set of illustrations for like a onboarding flow, that's like 5 illustrations. That's fine. A case study of a whole design system of illustration would be much better. But yeah, that's I think generally 3 to 5 legitimate case studies or pieces is what I would look for. Honestly, most reviewers probably don't spend more than 5 or 10 minutes skimming through, and if you get enough like attention and intrigue, they'll spend more time and actually read through and really you want to spark interest, like, oh, this person's got some chops, let me read more about this project, this is very interesting. So yeah, generically 3 to 5 projects, but that all depends on the depth and the complexity of the projects. All right, this question is from Scott Brown. What would your design setup be if you were on a budget? I think everyone's always on a budget unless your company's buying your design setup. But if I was starting out brand new or had to recommend a design setup for a brand new designer, probably say get like the cheapest Mac, either a refurbished MacBook Pro or like a MacBook Air, and a copy of Sketch. I think that's all you would need. I mean, Illustrator's nice, and you can definitely get Illustrator on a monthly basis. So if you're really strapped, I would say only pay for Illustrator the months that you need it. Though that's basically my design setup. I mean, I also use like After Effects and movie editing software and Photoshop and InVision and other things. But when it comes down to it, 90% of my work is all in Sketch. I do some icon stuff in Illustrator, but yeah, in running Sketch, you really don't need a big machine either. It's a pretty light program, so the cheapest Mac you can find and Sketch is what I would recommend. If you want to go super, super cheap, you could probably get by, and I did this almost at Netflix, with just a MacBook or MacBook Air and a copy of Keynote. It's going to be harder to deliver designs that way, like actual assets, but you could flesh out quite a bit of UX with just Keynote if you have enough assets and resources to pull from. But most generally, Sketch is probably the best solution. All right, last question. This is from Nicholas. He says, is it worthwhile to include my graphic design work on my website when I'm applying for UX design internships? This kind of goes back to the other portfolio question. I'm not big on showing work that's not applicable. It depends on the type of internship and the type of company that you're applying for. But in general, if you don't have enough work in UX to show that you need a UX internship and all you have is your graphic design work, you probably shouldn't be applying yet. You can try. My recommendation would be not to include your graphic design work, but to spend more time creating some portfolio pieces that are UX related, so you don't have to show that graphic design work. If you have enough UX work or product work to show in your portfolio, then just show that. There's no reason to show branding and graphics, layout and print in your portfolio for an internship, unless those like roles are going to be required of you. If you're applying for a UX position at an agency that does like full branding, marketing, product, digital, display, environmental, put all of it in there, because you're probably going to do a little bit of all of that. But if you're applying for strictly like a product UX job at like at a digital agency or at like an actual software company, that branding stuff is not so valuable in my opinion. I'd focus more on filling up your portfolio with stuff that's relevant to the work that you actually want to do and learn about. I'll take this one last question. This is from Philip. This is the second question. He said, an engineering-led company, how do you communicate the value of design and get everyone on board in order to achieve one-to-one implementation? So this is an interesting question. I've worked for 2 big engineering-led companies, namely Netflix and Google. Both founders of both companies are engineers. Both have very large engineering and testing culture. I think part of the issue with this question is the perception of design. I think designers are constantly fighting for pixel perfection, and silo themselves to say that they're the only ones that are involved in the design process. And I think that creates this huge divide between engineering, leadership, and design, and a lot of tension. I think the better way to approach implementation is to align with leadership and engineering on what the goals of the product are. And then if you can align your designs and the quality of the implementation of those designs to those goals, then that's an easy sell. So often I feel like designers are more focused on the actual visual perfection of a screen, and given the flexibility of responsive web, the variety of device sizes and densities of screens we have today, it's very hard at any point to provide a mock or a spec to an engineer that can be implemented to your expectations. I find often in my own specs and designs I've sent, things are implemented perfectly because I didn't do enough work to show the variance and the depth of flexibility of that design. Often that can be very exhaustive and almost impossible to do. What I found works better is to involve my engineer very early, work on them with very, very rough designs, get most of it through to know that the design works well and that you've thought about all the cases. And then once you have implementation that shows the variety of implementations that you have to solve for, then perfect and sit side by side with that engineer, do red lines, figure out the details. But the waterfall process of designing everything how you think it's perfect and then saying, here, build it, is just kind of a shitty way to work with people that are on your team, and they're the barrier between you and getting your designs implemented correctly. So I think this is more of a relationship issue than it is a process issue. Something that I've done that works well too, there's very aspirational designs that we all create, whether it's visual or product ideas. If you're in a larger organization, it's very engineering minded. There's lots of ways to, it's almost like propaganda, but to publicize and share your work almost subconsciously. So there's been many teams I've been on where there's work that hasn't been approved to be built. It's out of scope. It may not even have all buy-in across the company, but explorations and things that we're doing aspirationally in the design team, we would print out, hang up on the walls, build a fake marketing site of what the world could be in the future. It's a good way to show a company at large and lots of people kind of your aspirations and what could be in this almost elevated and hypothetical way. And I've seen this work where engineers will be like, hey, why aren't we doing that? Or managers or directors will be like, hey, I saw that thing on the wall. This doesn't look like what we saw on the wall. This is what that should be. And so inadvertently you can kind of get your way and get a higher level of design without having to go head to head, back to back, whatever the phrase is, without having to go to battle on the early stages when you're just trying to build code and get things built, and the actual polish and implementation isn't so critical. Hope that answers your question, Phil. If not, send me a DM. We can chat more. I'm interested to hear about what you're working on. That's it. Commuting QA number 3 in the bag. Really enjoyed doing this. I'm in lots of traffic right now. I'll be on the road for about 2 hours, but this is going to be almost a half an hour already, so I'm going to cut it off. Thanks for your questions. I'm probably going to put out another question in the next month or so and do another Q&A. If you don't like this and you don't want to put questions out, just don't respond and I'll stop making the videos. But if you enjoy this, please ask questions so that I can answer them, and I'll keep making these videos. And yeah, get after it. Good seeing you. Take care. All the loves and feels. Less hate, more love. Take care of each other. There's enough assholes out there. All right. Cheers.